Welcome to the second session of our series called Mine. Last week we talked about this truth, that all I have has come my way by the loving hand of God, meaning God is the source of everything that we have. This truth can help us begin to live with gratitude instead of worry and thankfulness instead of guilt. And it reminds us that God has our back, that God will provide, and that God will help us through whatever comes our way. So today, we're going to be turning our attention to a second truth, that I must learn to live joyfully within God's current provision for my life. Now, not many of us would argue that we live in a culture of instant gratification. If we see something that we want, we can have it now and pay for it eventually, plus a mere 15.68 interest rate, which is today's average credit card interest rate, by the way. We like to spend, and often we spend in a way that is way beyond our means. And many times this leaves us exhausted, worried, and overwhelmed by our financial situation. Have you ever been there? Maybe you're there now. Regardless, debt enslaves us. It robs us of the freedom that God longs for us to live in. One way to look at debt is the way that Pastor Bill Hybels defines it. Debt is wanting more than God's current provision for your life and arranging another way of getting it for yourself. Let me repeat that just in case you missed it. Debt is wanting more than God's current provision for your life and arranging another way of getting it for yourself. You see, this is what so many of us do when we look at our current level of provision and we say, God, you didn't get this right. You did not provide enough. My provision level needs to be up here, and you just got it wrong. And so we use debt to arrange a provision level way beyond what God provides. And for a fleeting moment, this feels good. It makes us happy. But inevitably, debt always leads to the slavery that King Solomon warned about. He writes in the book of Proverbs, "The borrower is servant to the lender." Debt literally closes the shackles around our wrists. It owns us. But the good news is that there's another way to live. The Apostle Paul writes, "I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. And I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want," in Philippians 4:12. At the time that he writes these words to the Philippians, he's being held captive as a prisoner for over 2 years. And throughout his adult life, he'd faced beatings, he'd been shipwrecked at sea, he'd been starved, suffered without shelter. I mean, this was a guy who knew what it was like to be shivering, naked and cold. Paul knew some incredibly tough circumstances, and so he speaks with some sense of credibility. So when Paul says that he has learned to be content in all of these circumstances, he's telling us this: material abundance is not the basis for contentment. So what was his secret to being content? Well, the very next verse in his letter says this: "I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength." The great secret to Paul's contentment was not self-sufficiency. It was not material abundance. It was God-sufficiency. Everything about Paul's life was God-centered. So for us, this means that we need to learn to make financial decisions that are based not on quick impulses, but instead according to God's provision for our lives. And when we do this, it'll not only produce contentment in our lives, it can also help us experience joy when we do spend money. God wants us to live joyfully within His current provision. So here's a couple takeaways for you. First, commit to living within God's current provision for your life. Ask God to help you determine what you should have priority on in your spending, and then spend as much money on those priorities as God's current provision will allow. A second step, consider signing up for Financial Peace University to learn how to get your spending under control and get free from debt. Finally, we want you to pray for freedom in this area. Pray that God would help you to experience a God-centered way to use your resources. Have a great small group.